Welcome back to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and I wanted to cap off the series on warfare by writing what I'm calling the modern Screwtape Letters. The title of this episode comes from a book by C.S. Lewis called The Screwtape Letters, and it is a wonderfully odd and quirky book. It gets its name from a senior demon named Screwtape, who writes letters to his nephew, Wormwood, who is a more junior ranking demon. So you've got the higher ranking demon, Uncle Screwtape, writing letters of advice to his nephew named Wormwood, a lower ranking demon. And Wormwood's goal is to assault and torment those humans over which he has been assigned. Since the letters are from one demon to another, they are written from the perspective of the demons. And therefore, for example, God is referred to as the enemy. So what follows is my attempt to continue in the vein of C.S. Lewis and write some more of these letters. One of the reasons I'm sharing these letters is because it's important to know how your enemy thinks. In other words, to know at some level how evil operates. I will include a full transcript on my website for those who want it. Thank you so much for listening. Letter 1, on intimate enemies. My dear Wormwood, I was pleased to watch your subject pick a fight with his wife last night, especially over something so stupid. Hopefully they will get into it again tonight. If they do, here's some advice. First, once you get lovers started in a conflict, make sure they stay focused on the content of what they are fighting about, rather than the way in which they are engaging in the conflict. You want them to be more interested in being right than being in right relationship with one another. Second, remember that all conflict begins with something, usually something rather small. But the lovers begin to really despise one another when they start reacting to the pain that we planted in them decades ago. The goal is to fan the flames of their suspicion of each other and their distrust of each other until they each feel like the other is their enemy. Remember, all of your subjects intuitively know that there is an enemy. Our relentless attacks on them have made them all feel like there is something in the world that is against them. So, your job is to make sure that they equate the enemy with their spouse or a neighbor or a coworker, or best of all, with themselves. As long as they don't begin to wonder about our presence, that would be disastrous. The biggest thing we have going for us is that they don't believe in us. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Letter 2, on the creativity of becoming themselves. My dear Wormwood, remember, your subject bears the enemy's hideous image, and your subject reflects that image in a unique way. Since you cannot wipe out that image, the next best thing is to train your subject to actually hate the particular way in which she uniquely reflects the enemy's glory. In short, your goal is to train her to hate that which makes her glorious. If, in addition, you can convince your subject to admire the God image in another and to strive to become more and more like another, this would be delightful. Get her trying to be someone else. Even if that someone else is sickeningly godly, that doesn't matter. What your subject does not know is that she can't become that other person because the enemy has created her to be herself. It is disgusting how much the enemy delights in diversity. Your job is to create a more monotone world by making sure your subject does not catch a vision of who she truly is, the unique way that she reflects God. Feel free to guide her to become a kind and loving wife, a godly and humble preacher, a passionate and vibrant artist. It doesn't matter as long as she does not become herself. I get absolutely giddy thinking about a world filled with people trying to be more like other well-known Christians. Monotony is our goal. Our task is to wipe creativity off the face of the earth. The essence of creativity is gift. All creative endeavors are gifts to the world. The most creative endeavor one can undertake is the endeavor to become oneself. The greatest gift your subject can give to others and to the enemy is the gift of becoming herself. These humans are created in the image of a God who is constantly expressing himself in the world. As a result, your subject is likewise created to express herself. Your goal is to make sure she becomes committed to hiding her true self and focused on becoming someone else. As long as she is focused on being like this woman over here or that woman over there, everything will be fine. But our cause is in grave jeopardy if she begins to reach down into the depth of her heart, grab hold of the way she reflects God as no one else does, and then offers that unique self to the world. Look, you share the same disgust as I do for all forms of art. Music, dance, painting, poetry, all of it is to be utterly despised. But if you sum up all of these disgusting creative expressions, they pale in comparison to the worst of all creative endeavors, namely that of a human being who has truly become herself. So far, you have failed miserably at this. I love you. Always remember that. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Letter 3. On the absolute disaster of the vulnerable emotions. My dear Wormwood, last night at the movies, your subject was seen feeling sadness about his relationship with his dad. This is not good. I don't care that the movie had nothing to do with fathers and sons. Something in the film connected your subject to a sad memory with his own father. Let me remind you that you are instructed to keep your subject from feeling his tender emotions at all costs. Next thing you know, he might be found mourning. Hell forbid that. Let me give you a simple maxim. Whenever these humans start feeling their emotions and being curious about them, that's bad. You've screwed this up royally. So here are 2 strategies to get back on track. The first strategy is quite simple. Distraction. If he starts to feel some of his sorrow, sometimes the best tactic is to simply remind him of the patio project that is still unfinished or the tax return that sits on his desk. Anything to get him out of his heart. This isn't rocket science. Don't make it more complicated than it is. The second strategy is to tempt him to turn his sadness into either anger or despair. If he becomes full of anger at his father, the sorrow will go away. That's the goal. Your subject will readily prefer the feeling of anger to the feeling of sorrow. However, if he won't let the sorrow turn into anger, if he lingers in the sorrow, then tempt him to despair. Any of the following sentences will usually do the trick. This sorrow is too big to recover from. Or if you start crying about this, you'll never stop. Or if you let yourself feel this, you won't be able to function in life. Soon your subject will feel despair, which, again, takes him out of sorrow and grief. Then, as always, once your subject has spent some time feeling anger or despair, accuse him of being a poor Christian. Don't screw this up like you did the last time. I love you like a son. Your uncle, Screwtape. Letter 4, on betrayal from a friend. My dear Wormwood, if you have no other choice, use one of your subject's enemies to harm her. But this is a last resort. You can accomplish much more by assuring that the harm is done by a friend, by someone she trusts. Remember the words of David in Psalm 55. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend. These humans are created in the image of a triune God. Therefore, close, trusting relationships lie at the core of who they are. As a result, it is very difficult for them to overcome betrayal by a trusted friend. Even small betrayals can be compounded over time when the betrayals come from friends. Remember, Judas betrayed the Son of Man not with a slap, but with a kiss. Once your subject is reeling from the betrayal, chastise her for trusting her friend so much. Remind her that it is ultimately her fault that this happened. If she had not trusted so much, the betrayal would not sting like it does. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Letter 5, on offering power. My dear Wormwood, you have done well to wound your subject through the verbal abuse of his boss. Your subject felt the sting of powerlessness in the face of his boss's abusive power. Now, wait patiently until your subject begins to want revenge. This will inevitably happen because he is created in the enemy's image, and since God hates the misuse of power, his despicable creatures will likewise feel the same hatred when they are violated. As your subject's desire for vengeance peaks, observe what type of power he craves, and then offer it to him. If he wants a keen mind and articulate speech so that he can fight back with carefully constructed logical arguments, give it to him. Your subject will never crave power more than when power has just been used against him. If you can successfully entice him to respond to abusive power in kind, you are well on your way. Although it is delightful to watch your subject suffer at the hands of another, these humans are still fully capable of reflecting the enemy's glory while they suffer. Your flaming arrow landed in your subject's heart when his boss screamed at him. Good. But so far, he is merely reeling from the sting. He has not yet been infected by the evil carried by the arrow. So your work is shoddy at best. Only when your subject retaliates with abusive power of his own have you diminished the enemy's glory on the earth, and that's all we really care about. Wormwood, don't screw this up. You should be ashamed of yourself for how poorly you have performed so far. I love you dearly. Screwtape. Letter 6, on trauma and abuse. My dear Wormwood, your subject has recently committed himself to deal with the lingering consequences of abuse. This is not good. The best strategy is to prevent a person from becoming aware that he has been abused. Once the reality of abuse has been acknowledged, our work is in jeopardy. Do not forget why we attacked this man in the first place. His glory was disgustingly resplendent. The unique way in which he reflected the enemy's glory was, and sad to say, still remains, a considerable threat. Indeed, his choice to address the abuse necessitates a tactical adjustment. Your subject's commitment to address the abuse will be fueled by his hope that healing is possible. Attack this hope. Use the same approach we used with Eve. Create doubt about the enemy's goodness. Encourage thoughts like, God is holding out on me. Your subject knows that the enemy's son presently sits on a throne in the heavenlies with all rulers and powers in submission to him. The fact that this belief persists is, of course, your fault. However, this knowledge can be twisted and put to good use. Here's what I mean. Your subject wants his wounds removed. The enemy does not remove wounds. Instead, he takes the wounds and uses them to make the man more glorious than he was before the injury. It is a shameful practice, proving once again that the enemy is utterly unfair. So, begin by repeatedly whispering, "When are you going to get over this?" Then, watch to see what happens as a result of this question that is not a question. If your subject wonders why the enemy has not fully healed him, fan the flame of this thought until your subject's despair crescendos. Then immediately accuse him of thinking such terrible thoughts about his heavenly Father. Since your subject truly loves the enemy, he will chastise himself for doubting the enemy's goodness. Thus, his despair will now be coupled with self-contempt, a lovely pairing, one of my favorites. A word of caution. Make sure your subject does not actually think about your question as a question. We deal only with accusations. A question is a delightful tool as long as it is never really a question. If, after whispering, "When are you going to get over this?" you find that your subject is foolish enough to consider it as a question, stop immediately. Fall back at once to trusty distraction or risk any number of disastrous outcomes. For example, suppose your subject remembers that a day is coming when his healing will be complete. Suppose he remembers that the enemy will soon wipe away every trace of hurt, harm, and heartache. Once this happens, it is only a matter of time before praise and gratitude fill your subject's entire being, and we are forced to listen as one more voice joins that hideous cacophony of worship. Conversely, his consideration of the question might lead him to consider not what will happen in the future, but what has already happened in the past. He may begin to reflect on the fact that in a very real sense, he has already gotten over it. Abuse has a singular purpose: to seduce these humans to join us, period. And it is by receiving our offer of power, the power to protect themselves from future harm and the power to take vengeance, that they join us. Your subject has refused our offer of power despite numerous offers. Thus, you have failed to accomplish your mission. Although your subject continues to be tormented, the abuse failed to achieve its primary purpose of enticing him to use the power we have so graciously extended to him. In short, he has not joined us, which is to say that he has already overcome the abuse. Who knows what might happen if your subject considers these things? I dare say it might result in more singing. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. There it is, 6 letters from the perspective of the kingdom of darkness. I know that many of those letters may have been hard to follow orally. So if you prefer to read them, you can download the transcript. I will put it on my website. Thank you so much for listening. I had fun writing these. I hope that you were intrigued and in some ways provoked to new places in your imagination by listening to them. Also, remember, if you want to get the next episode as soon as it is released, please download the Place We Find Ourselves app and support the podcast by paying $2.99 per month. Sign-up instructions are on my website. Have a great couple of weeks.